baby, give me that toot, toot. Right? Talking about bounce, 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 but no. Got me messed up. Y'all are talking about my mind is telling me no, my body is telling me yes. I'm talking about my body is telling me I want to throw up right now. Hey y'all, thank you so much for tuning into this second episode of Talk To, Not At. For those who are new, my name is Abby and I'm your host, and this show is produced by the amazing Debate Boutique Network. Now, a little bit about myself. I have a love for current events and political science as an alumnus of high school and college policy debate, and now a coach of both activities. Yet I also have this weird, nerdy passion for life sciences, especially biology, which is why I'm so ecstatic to host a show that focuses on having conversation at the intersection of these two fields and right in my personal bubble of expertise. Now, each episode is unique in that we're going to focus on a topic that adds some pressure or some difficulties, or is just something that we need to talk about because of the way that it impacts our everyday lives. We're going to make sure that we upload ourselves to the conversation so that way we can really create a space to engage in some critical dialogue, talk about our feelings, and make sure that we update ourselves as to what's happening in the world around us. But we're not going to stop there and leave ourselves hanging. We're then going to brainstorm some strategies together so that way we can figure out what's up next. What are we going to do now that we know all that we can know about the situation, now that we know what's really going on? So we're going to talk about ways that we can protect our own mental and physical health in the process. Let's talk. Whew. Okay, y'all. Today we have a topic, and I'm so excited to get into it. But before we do, let me tell y'all a little story. So this happened about 2 years ago, and I remember it so vividly because it was so telling of some things that I needed to recognize. Now, about 2 years ago, me and one of my close friends, we was out having a girls' night out, and we were at this venue, we were dancing, we were just having a great time. And little side note about me, I really can't dance. So for me to be out on the floor, busting a move, and just attempting, well, probably in the process making a fool of myself, means I really had to be enjoying the environment, the atmosphere, everything. And I remember telling my homegirl, this place is it. The vibe is great, the music's great, the DJ's great, the crowd is great. This is the new spot. I was so enjoying myself. And then, the DJ gets on the mic and goes a little yo, 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 and is about to address the crowd. And he responded by saying, I know you all don't like him, but we all like this song. And next thing I know, everybody around me talking about, baby, give me that toot, toot. Right? Talking about bounce, bounce, bounce. But no, if you was sitting there, started jigging a little bit, you thought I was about to put something down that you was about to pick back up. I don't know why, because we are not R. Kelly fans over here. We do not love and support black men or men in general who do predatory, abusive things, especially onto black women and black children. When I saw how the crowd responded and that song came on, I was good. I sat down, my night was done. I remember being like, okay, the DJ canceled, this music is canceled, this spot is canceled, and the crowd, y'all are all canceled too for thinking that this is somehow appropriate. That we can literally sit there and recognize as a preempt to the song that this man is an abuser, this man is a rapist, this man harms black women, and then just disassociate and start jigging to it. Y'all got me messed up. Y'all are talking about my mind is telling me no, my body is telling me yes. I'm talking about my body is telling me I want to throw up right now. My body is telling me I am sick to my stomach to see the way that we can just be okay with perpetrators who harm our own community. In that moment, what it told me was that we don't love and we don't protect black women and children like we need to or like we claim we do. And I started recognizing in other environments how common this type of logic was, how often we would justify playing R. Kelly's music. Now, I'm not here today, y'all, to try to convince y'all that R. Kelly is who he is. The facts are there. The cards are on the table. This man is an abuser. This man is a rapist. This man is a pedophile. There's no debate about it. I mean, this man has been in scandal after scandal for decades, starting back when he was in his mid to late 20s, and he's out here having an abusive and pedophilic relationship with Aaliyah to the point where he forced this 15-year-old girl to illegally marry him because he thought that he got her pregnant. And then on top of it, didn't stop there, we now have other women coming out talking about the abuse they endured under R. Kelly's mentorship. We have cases in Chicago and cases in Florida that are having mass amount of evidence and claims from different families and different women and children. We also have R. Kelly's current trials happening now, where it turns out this man was giving out STIs to people. And on top of it, we have more victims coming forward. In the process, we have people who worked closely with him talking about how he forced them as part of their job description to orchestrate this marriage with Aaliyah or this relationship with children. I mean, y'all, this man used to hang out at high schools looking for women to sit here and be friends with. No, not women, children, young girls. He would hang out at high schools looking for young girls for him to befriend and then mentor and then say, oh, you got to come work with me, but your parents can't come. You got to come to a different city so I can have full access to you. Yeah, y'all, that's grooming 101. So it's not a question of has R. Kelly done what he's done. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're not trying to debate the facts. Because the reality is, it's plain and simple. And if we want to be in that position where we're trying to ignore what he's done, or we're trying to convince ourselves, yeah, no, that's not real, then I'm going to suggest that we take a minute and we listen to some testimonies. I mean, we got not one, but 2 seasons of Surviving R. Kelly Out, where the victims are coming forward and reliving their past traumas just to try to convince some of that general population that what happened to them actually happened, which is not something that Black women and children should have to do. So if we want to sit here and divorce ourselves from the facts, then that's a personal thing that you got to step outside yourself to work out. Because on the other hand, we have some of us trying to justify, well, okay, you know, we can still listen to his music even though we recognize he's done all these things. Like, his music is still beneficial. Beneficial to what? Because when you're listening to certain songs, those songs are formulated or were created based on relationships that he was having with these children, with these women. You're listening to his confessions of him doing these crimes. I mean, we have video footage of him engaging in horrific, pornographic, pedophilic, abusive acts with children. That can't be ignored either. So my question then comes to, how are we able to allow this to continue to happen? Like, what's happening up here that justifies it to ourselves why it's okay to do this, why it's okay to listen to R. Kelly knowing the reality of the situation? Because we can't pretend there's not consequences that come with that. That very same performance or logic is exactly what happened when it came to Chicago. And Chicago PD pressing 21 charges of child pornography on R. Kelly. And after 6 years of a battle, the NAACP, a pro-Black, a very influential pro-Black organization, was sitting here defending him. And they have so much defense for him that it made it hard for the prosecution to paint R. Kelly in a negative light. So they eventually had to drop all 21 charges. Yeah, y'all, them consequences, them children, they don't deserve that. And especially when we think about, oh, why do these women come out now? Well, when you have political Black, pro-Black organizations repping the man who committed all this violence against you, you're asking these women to give up their lives, to give up their safety, to give up their mental health, their physical health, to relive their trauma over and over again just so y'all can do what y'all did with Surviving R. Kelly and dismiss it. So that's my issue, y'all, today. That's what I want to talk about because I'm not getting it. And honestly, this is a moment where we kind of update ourselves, right? R. Kelly got his current trial going on. R. Kelly got this legacy of 2 decades or more than 2 decades, my bad, of engaging in pedophilic and abusive acts. R. Kelly is a perpetrator, has committed to this pattern, right? So we know what's going on. And the start to this conversation is a little intense. So some of you all right now are like, okay, Abby, I'm with you. I know where you're at. I totally get it. I'm totally like, whoop, you know, we don't rep R. Kelly either. Like, screw him. And you're like ready to go on. But if you're on that side, right, we also recognize that when we're talking about abuse, it's a hard conversation. So I would suggest, you know, we all take a minute, right? Because for some of us, it's sitting close to home. We take a minute and we really address, we really deal with those emotions that we're feeling when it comes to the conversation of R. Kelly. On the other hand, some of you are like, okay, listen, even if I agree that what he's done is bad, I still don't understand why you think not listening to his music is that important. And that's the part that I want to take a moment, right, where if we're feeling that way, because I've been there too. I have been on that position. I have been where, you know, I used to have The World's Greatest as the #1 song on my iPod. And yes, I said iPod. Please don't sit here and think about my age right now. But yes, I said iPod. But I used to be there too, right? So I'm asking that we take a moment to step back and think about the reality of the situation, the testimonies, the evidence, the court cases, the actual documents that are outlined, to think about, okay, well, what really is deeper, right? What's the bigger issue about being able to divorce ourselves from the violence this man has done and then listen to his music? How does that make victims feel? How does that make others feel? What does that say about us loving and caring Black women and children? So I'm going to take a moment and think about both of those things, and also cool myself down, because reliving all of the horrific things this man has done gets me heated. So right now, y'all, we can all take a moment and just breathe. All right, y'all. Hope we were all able to take a moment, think about our feelings, digest what we're going through. I know I needed that relaxation second, because it's important as we're jumping into some difficult, hard topics, but also trying to do some self-reflection, that we make some mental space available for us, that we look at the facts, look at what's on the table, and then take a second to make sure that we really give ourselves the opportunity to fully keep an open mind as we're jumping into some important conversation that's going to be valuable to me, to y'all. I know I'm ready to really grow from this and get into this. But I also want to make sure that we took a second to read that testimony that was on the screen, because that's an example of a woman coming forward, right? Actually reliving her trauma, her experiences, so that she can tell the world what happened to her, in the hopes that it doesn't happen to other women. But also to recognize the feelings that she has for the fact that people continue to dismiss her claims, to dismiss her experiences, to dismiss her positionality and her violence, just to justify listening to his music. I mean, that quote itself is a crux as to why I think this is an important conversation for us to have today, because that's what I can't wrap my mind around. 1 second, we're sitting here talking about, Aaliyah, we love you. Aaliyah, happy birthday. Aaliyah, we miss you. Aaliyah, R.I.P. And the next second, we're sitting here bumping R. Kelly's music, knowing that this man had an abusive, predatory like pedophilic relationship with her. And not only that, but then he continued to have this legacy around the nation of inflicting those same forms of violence onto other black women and black children. What is happening up here? How are we able to have that cognitive dissonance as a community? I mean, in an intercommunal conversation, y'all, what's going on in the black psyche? That's the conversation I want to get into, because something ain't clicking. So clearly, because of anti-blackness and slavery, there's damage to the ways that the black psyche operates, to the ways that we conceptualize humanity, morality, and then that translates to how we justify doing different actions. Now, when I say black psyche, y'all, I'm gonna get a little Freudian on us for a moment. I'm talking about the three aspects that really shape our subconscious. And when I say three aspects, I mean the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, your id represents your natural instincts, your barest emotions, these desires that we have to repress, because once we come into reality, once we recognize that there is a society that exists outside of ourselves, we have to repress our selfish or self-centered desires, rawest instincts, to then be able to navigate the world as it is. So the id represents repressed desires, right? But then on the other side, the other spectrum of that, we have our superego. Now, our superego is shaped by language, by meaning, by the world that we are born into. So your superego represents your morality, right? The idea of becoming the superhuman, being the best human or humanity representation that you could be. So to do that, it means you have to completely reject these desires. So there becomes this navigation, this trade, this internal economy, right, where we're trading our raw instinctual desires with this moral value system, and it creates our ego. Our ego is our reality. It's the decisions we make. It's the lived experiences that we have. It's that intersection between your desire and your moral compass. Yet when you are black, right, you're born into a world that's coded by anti-blackness. And I'm going to draw on our conversation that we had last week, where we talked about the ways that the black positionality is used to give coherency to humanity, to legal forms, and to morality, to then allow the white master to inflict gratuitous violence onto the slave, so that way the white master doesn't become immoral. So these structures that we talked about last week then shape how we understand morality, but then it also shapes the desires that we have. So in terms of the black psyche, it means that we have this instinctual, raw desire to avoid suffering. And it's not just us. Everybody wants to avoid suffering, right? Nobody wants to be in a position of violence. But being born into a world that's anti-black, into the afterlife of slavery, we recognize that to officially remove ourselves from a position of suffering, we must remove ourselves from the position of blackness, because blackness is permanently contextualized as the other, as the slave, as the dead in the world that we live in modernity. So I'm not saying, right, don't get me twisted, y'all. I ain't saying that you waking up talking about, oh, I want to be white one day. No, what I'm saying is a recognition of how we understand what it means to be humanity in these subconscious or symbolic performances that are attuned to that, which means that you are able to assert your will. You're able to have consent. You are able to say no to an officer when they are performing illegal acts against you, right? Different things that are not provided to the black body, that we can't enact out, that we can't perform. So it's a question of how do you, in reality, escape that violence? And that means you have to escape being black. Which means we then talk about our morality. And our morality side, we recognize humanity, or a moral compass, is structured on this antagonistic relationship with the position of being black. That we used violence on the slave to then justify laws and moral structures, right? So that way the master was always going to be good and pure, right? They're good, the black is criminal. So our moral compass is always attempting to astride or atone to notions produced by white society that only re-inflict anti-black forms of violence. So what does that mean for then our reality, right? Our reality becomes, how do we trade this strive for our morals while also trying to negate our blackness at the same time? And it creates some damage to how we then perform ourselves. We end up performing anti-blackness, and it creates intercommunal violence. Because on top of that, then we also have the conversation about the Oedipal complex. Now, y'all remember in Greek mythology, Oedipus, right? This man, when I first heard this story, I was like, "Oop, that's creepy, incestual." But it was the Greek mythological story about this man who was given this prophecy that he was going to kill his dad and then marry his mom, right? So that logic was then used by psychoanalysis to try to understand the way that we understand family or kinship structures. And in white society, there is this power that is attributed to the position of the father or the man of the house, right? That you have the obligation of protecting the family, but then the son or the children have the desire to grow up and fulfill that position of that family structure themselves. Right? That kind of idea of like when the dad leaves, he's like, "Okay, son, you're the man of the house today until I get home." And the son's like, "Yay, that's great," right? Because that's the goal, this psychological like desire to fulfill that position. Yet when it comes to the black positionality, again, that conversation about these specific forms of violence that happen onto the black woman that destroyed the ability for the black kinship structure to exist in the ways that white society like articulates what family means. Now, one disclaimer, we're recognizing that these conversations are, we recognize like the nuclear family of white society is focused on like this very heteronormative family structure. So regarding that and keeping that in mind, we then talk about the ways that the violence that the black woman experienced made it so she had to take the burden on of becoming the namesake of the family. That while it used to be the father passing down his name, it became the black woman's womb that created the positionality of blackness or the commodity, or was able to produce more slaves for free labor production. So it was her positionality that was then passed down to her children that overcoded her, because as a mom or dad, you weren't able to take care of your children. The conversation of anti-blackness and the unique forms of violence you faced on the plantation overshadowed that. Your kids could be taken from you any moment, any day, but the only thing that stuck with them was the birthing of their blackness that came from their mother. So in white society, that ability is a power, yet in the black society, that ability is a burden. Yet it's something that is desired by the white master. So that desire creates a rivalry between the black man and the views of the white woman, or the black woman, right? So the black man now has this rivalry with the black woman and creates this intercommunal violence, because for the black man to be able to reach that desire of humanity, right? Reach that moral high standard, that highest self, they have to completely negate their blackness. Yet in the process of doing that, they also need to reclaim something that has now been passed to the black woman as a burden based on the sexual violence that she had to endure on the plantation. So they need to negate the positionality of the black woman as well, the unique forms of sexual and libidinal violence that she experienced, so that way they can then ascribe to higher human positionality. So if the black woman's position now represents the stark reminder that the black father is not able to access that power structure, it creates this form of violence that needs to be inflicted, this erasure of the black woman's positionality, this erasure of her suffering, to then ignore what cannot impossibly be ignored, right? To ignore something that is perpetually going to exist. It's not going anywhere. All it does is make it so black women suffer in silence. But our suffering becomes valuable only for the production of humanity in white society and the nuclear family and the privileges atoned to whiteness and white women. Yet at the same time, our suffering means nothing for ourselves. We don't exist for ourselves, but we exist based on what we can produce for the world. And that's literally how we then understand our suffering. So when we look at R. Kelly, right, we recognize that you cannot have both succeeding at the same time. That is the damage that's happening in our black psyche, that we think that we cannot both succeed at the same time, that for black women to win the conversation that's happening with R. Kelly right now, to receive justice, the black man has to fail. In the process of R. Kelly being found guilty, it means that he becomes that stereotype, that representation of black men as being predators, of black men as being over-sexual, as black men as being aggressive and dangerous to society. He becomes that token representation, which means black men now are forced to take another step back from that subconscious goal of reaching humanity. Yet the black woman, right? It just means there's a recognition of her suffering. For her to then be placed in the world, there is some form of violence that now has to happen onto black men. That's how it seems when we think of this in terms of a psychoanalytical conversation. Yet the reality of it is, right, that that's a calculated form of anti-blackness to create intercommunal violence. That the unique positionality of black suffering, right, is we're going to pull on one more time from last week, y'all. You cannot choose what you cannot refuse. So we can't change the positions that we are born into, but rather we can focus on creating intercommunal love and kinship structures, queer kinship structures that don't exist within the white nuclear family, something that exists outside the traditional conversation of the Oedipal complex, the traditional conversation of how we understand desires and we understand morality. By first recognizing, okay, why do we think it's okay to make these choices? Why do we think that the black man now has to lose for black women to receive some justice, to have some recognition of their suffering? Why is it that we think that we can look at, well, at least R. Kelly did something productive. Well, at least his music is a little bit good, because that still seems to say that there's something valuable within the work or production produced by black men. But what's that value for? Is that value for claiming a closer position to humanity that is created in the violence of blackness? No, that's not something that we want. That's not something that we need. That's the issue, y'all, is that we have our psyche damaged due to the afterlife of slavery. We got to understand that. We got to be here with it and recognize it's deeper than just trying to justify supporting his music. But that's what we're supposed to do to create intercommunal violence. We're supposed to not love onto each other. We're supposed to not create tight-knit family structures. We're supposed to have the absent black father and the black woman taking on the burdens of the world. But we got to change that. Okay, we got to do better. So if you were sitting here coming into this conversation trying to understand how we can still justify listening to him without, negating the violence that he's done, I hope we're here with it that it's so much deeper than that. That we can't do both, because that's the role that we're supposed to play. And that blackness is stronger than that. Blackness is better than that. And we're going to show that we are better than that by saying, you know what, we're going to hold our community accountable. But at the same time, we're going to make sure that we uplift our community, that through those kinship networks, we're able to uplift our community. But to do that, we really need to start protecting and loving on black women. And that's what's up next, y'all. That's what we got to do. That's what we got to do better at, because we just had a great conversation of the backgrounds as to why we justify our actions, as to think about what we do in our reality that is actually coded by some subconscious desires and value systems, these subconscious exchange markets that are happening behind the scenes. So the question is, what is next? Okay, we talked about we need to have better kinship structures, but at the same time, there's some of us who are sitting here and like, okay, I am that black woman, right? For us, it's like, okay, what do we do? We've been supporting the entirety of the world. We've been looked at as a mule for everyone else's suffering. So what do we do? What about us? I thought that's what we were centering, right? Yeah, y'all are right. And to that, it is okay, y'all, for us to be selfish sometimes. It is okay for us to say no. And that's hard, because that goes against the very positionality that we were supposed to fill within the world of saying no. And when I say no, I don't mean that there's certain situations that you can choose to not engage in. I recognize, again, right, y'all, that you can't always refuse everything that is happening to you. But what I mean is that when someone asks you to perform an extra labor, you got the right to say no, even if it is helping, even if it's supposed to be helping your community. Someone asks you, hey, you need to come out and protest for another black man that was shot. I'm not saying that we don't sit here and support our community. We don't love our community, but we also recognize the drain that we put on Black women to be the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Right? A movement that then becomes centered around Black men, which behind the scenes, it was 3 Black women who started that labor. That's what I'm saying, is that we can put our own psyche, we can put our own mental and physical health first sometimes. Center yourself in a world that is not centering you. Take up that space to claim, yo, I am here, okay? I suffer too. And I'm gonna make some noise in this conversation because I'm not about to continue to be silenced. And sometimes that is through acts of refusal. Sometimes that is through acts of speaking up. Sometimes that's when someone says, oh, can you engage in this R. Kelly conversation? I want to know your thoughts on it. And you're already like, listen, I'm keeping a buck with you. I don't mess with R. Kelly. Like, he's a piece of shit. Screw him. I'm good. And if they want to sit here and test you on it, you walk away. You're not obligated to continue to articulate yourself for the benefit or consumption of somebody else. Because, sis, that ain't the way that we got to be, right? We got to start protecting us. We got to start protecting here, protecting our physical body. Now, I'm not saying that we don't love Black men or that there aren't Black men who are out here supporting us, or that in a larger context, right, that we don't have tight-knit kinship structures and queer kinship structures. What I'm saying is that we need to recognize the unique suffering that Black women go through, and that it's not on Black women to tell the world that y'all gotta change all the time. But it gets to a point where, damn y'all, R. Kelly's evidence is really, really apparent. So if y'all ain't gonna sit here and start doing better and not listening to his music and not supporting him, then at some point, we gotta make sure that we protect ourselves too. And I'm not saying it's only Black men who fall into this logic. I don't want any of it to get twisted or to appear that I'm just bashing Black men. That's not the goal of the conversation, but rather to understand how both of our positionalities face unique forms of violence to break us apart as a community, and that Black women are forced to play the role of mothering and caring for the community, and Black men are ascribed this role of being the absent father due to the inability to perform certain characteristics that white society says are necessary to present yourself as a man. And that by understanding those unique ways that we both experience different forms of violence, we can continue to support Black men, but we also can make space to support Black women. We can say, yo, R. Kelly, we not messing with you no more. We can go out and cheer on and support those Black women and children too, y'all. These are children who are victims. But then at the same time, refuel that energy that Black women need to continue doing the stuff that we do to also support our community behind the scenes. Like, we can't keep pouring our cups out and not getting it poured back into. That's the point of this conversation today. Now, I really hope, like, I was able to convey some enjoyable, yet deep, yet challenging topics for us today, because, there was a lot that I had to think about. There's a lot that I have to think about now on our conversation. I want to think about ways that I can be more proactive for myself and my own mental health and my own physical health. Yeah, I also want to think about ways that I can engage in conversations about structural issues and violence and the unique violence that Black women face in a more healthy way, not just for myself, but a way that it doesn't sound like, okay, I'm just saying like our community just doesn't have love in it, right? I have ways that I want to think about engaging in the conversation of R. Kelly now in the future. There's a lot of takeaway moments that I have and a lot of feelings that I have as well too. But one of the things that I'm feeling right now is overwhelmed with love for my Black sisters out here and support for these victims, but also still that harsh reality that, you know, even after this conversation, it's not going to change the way that everybody engages with music. Yet, even throughout all of that, I still recognize that we were able to engage in some great dialogue, and hopefully some of us are now on that same page of like, yeah, you know what, Abby, I got some things I want to research too. I got some thoughts that I want to look up. Because the conversation doesn't stop here. It's something that keeps going on and on and on, and something that changes and reshapes as we learn more, as we get better at talking with each other, engaging with each other, and understanding more of the information, but also what's going on behind the scenes. But anyway, y'all, I hope you all really enjoyed this episode because I had a great time talking with you all. I really enjoyed our conversation. I just want to say thank you so much for tuning into this second episode of Talk To, Not At. Now, again, the conversation does not stop here, so please make sure that you follow us on our Instagram page at the Talk To Not At Show. And then also, if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, feelings, you want to upload yourself a little bit more, shoot me an email. I would love to continue the conversation outside of this chat right now. And the email is talktoabbie@debateboutique.com. Now, please, before you go, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and also the notification button so y'all can be ready for our episode next week, because y'all, we have touched on biology a little bit. We have touched on it with the testosterone conversation from last week. We touched on some psychoanalysis and psychology. We've gotten a little bit about science. We've talked a lot about anti-blackness, but y'all, next week we're really going to get into biological racism, which the scientist in me is about to come out. I am so excited. So please don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button. I'll see you all next week. Have a nice night. And remember, stay safe and stay healthy.